Hi, and welcome to our webcast today on employee engagement survey best practices. Today we'll be sharing best practices on how to set up, administer, report, and roll out your employee engagement survey results. My name is Charles Rogel, and I am the Vice President of Products and Marketing here at DecisionWise. Our presenter today is Tennille Rodman.
Hello.
Tennille is a Senior Assessment Consultant here at DecisionWise and is working toward the completion of a master's degree in Predictive Analytics from Northwestern University. She's been with DecisionWise now for 7 years, and she's an expert on how to conduct employee surveys and get the most from the results. DecisionWise has been in business now since 1996. We recently celebrated our 20th birthday party or anniversary, and we specialize in conducting employee engagement surveys and then helping our clients use the feedback to promote organization change and improvement. We're growing, and we recently were named to the Inc. 5000 list of the fastest growing companies in the United States for 2 years in a row now. This presentation is scheduled for 60 minutes. Everyone is on mute, so if you have questions, please use the question tool to submit them, and we will address them as we go. This webcast has been approved for 1 hour of recertification credit through both HRCI and SHRM, and after the presentation, I'll send an email that includes the program codes to redeem the free credit, along with links to the slides and other downloads. You can also download the slides and the other samples in the handout section on the toolbar on the right. In fact, I forgot to add those a little bit earlier, so I'll be adding those as we go along here. So as we begin, Tennille, let's talk about these outcome levels. So here's kind of the situation. I'll kind of set the tone here. Normally when someone wants to do an employee engagement survey, there's kind of one of two responses. They're doing it for the first time and they want to get a baseline. They want to understand what's going on in the organization. Or they've been doing it for a while and the process has kind of gone stale and they're looking to maybe revamp or change it in some way.
Yes, that's what I've seen and talking with other organizations. Many times they do just want a survey, but there are people who do want organization change. And I think anytime you do a survey, you should be prepared to do something with the results. So when we talk about these 4 outcome levels, you know, the first one is just providing a benchmark or kind of a baseline to establish what's going on, and perhaps there's not much action that's taken, you know, in that first year establishing the baseline. The next level is where once you do the survey, the executives take action. They have an action planning meeting or maybe a summit, and they can address 1 or 2 things from the survey results to make high-level changes. The third level is we really get into, you know, organizational transformation. If you've already done the survey, you know, for a baseline and you're looking to see, okay, where are all of our pain points, specific departments or managers that we need to focus on and do more in-depth action plans and come up with maybe more local solutions, that's where your third level here. And then you get to the fourth level, which is using data as a catalyst to drive that organization performance. And this can be through a variety of initiatives across the company. Most of the focus is on developing leadership capability. We find, you know, they're saying let's fix our organization, but a lot of time that focus goes to the leadership so that they can help employees improve.
So we'll talk more about this. And what I want to do as we describe some of these 4 categories is to launch a poll right now and have you participate by indicating where you kind of fit on this spectrum right now. So as an organization, are you looking to do a survey the first time, maybe establish a baseline, or are you more experienced in doing manager action planning or organization development? So take a moment to respond to our poll, and then we'll share the results with you, and this will help tailor kind of our presentation today and some of our talking points. And again, you know, everyone's on a different roadmap, we find, and there's really no wrong answer here, but it's just a matter of taking the time to kind of get more out of the process as you move along. So looks like most people have voted. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results with you. And in this scenario, we've got 62% establishing a baseline, 23% doing action planning, executive action planning, and the same doing manager action planning, and then 31% doing training and leadership development, organization development. So a lot of people doing this for the first time or in that the first phase.
Great. So we'll talk to you more about how you do establish that baseline and address confidentiality in that first year.
So now I move on to this recommended roadmap. So for those of you starting off for the first year, or maybe those of you in a few years, here are some recommendations in terms of what you can expect, or kind of what you should bite off as you go through the process, and kind of add and augment as you move along.
Yeah, in today's world, data is everywhere, and we want to make sure that the first time you do a survey, you don't get overwhelmed with the data. So one of the recommendations is the first year to establish that baseline, come up with some good survey questions that you'll want to trend year over year, and really establish that confidential process. If you use an outside firm like DecisionWise or others, that they can ensure that confidentiality so that employees can be honest. And that's one of the most important keys, is getting honest feedback so that you can take action based on what's really going on in the organization. The year one, we really recommend just sharing a high-level overview and doing something, picking one, maybe two things to say, we heard you, and we want to improve this going forward. I like to recommend to my clients almost doing like a branding for the survey, so that people know it's going to be a year-over-year thing. Employees know that they will have a yearly opportunity to give feedback about their work, their manager, the senior leaders, and the company. So that's what we recommend in year one.
Let me add to that, Sunil, because this is where, when we're talking about the boxes we were looking at before, this is kind of box one and number two. Mm-hmm. And so executive action planning was that second phase. And what we recommend, especially those of you doing this the first time, is to try to convince your executive team to get to that point. And most times it happens naturally, because what happens is you run the survey, you get the results, and then you realize, hey, we ought to do something about this, or come up with some ideas to make some improvements. And so it usually happens naturally, even though you might not plan on it up front.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we always recommend this not be just an HR initiative, but it's an initiative that's supported from the top, from the executives. We find people have more success in organizational change when it's championed by the CEO and the executives. They're encouraging participation to the survey, and then they're thanking employees for giving their feedback. When we get into year two, then we have trends, so you can see if you are improving, if progress has been made. This is where we may apply more demographic breakouts to the data. If you want to look at results by different departments and divisions and tenure groups, and even males versus females, that really understand where the pain points are in your organization.
So the first year you might not have asked those questions, or because you're trying to establish confidentiality.
Yes, and confidentiality, the first year your employees are going to, kind of test you and say, okay, you said it was confidential, maybe I write something that I'm going to see if I'm going to get called out for it. And so you may not want to have that many demographic filters applied to the data the first year. But in the second year, usually they're more comfortable giving their feedback, and then you as HR leaders or even executives will want to see some of that data. A lot of times, finance leaders, they always want all of the data, and some leaders just want it kind of summarized for them. So we actually have a robust online reporting tool that gives flexibility that way, and that way you can cut and slice the data in a way that is most relevant for your leaders. Year two is sometimes when we introduce business metrics. So executives are always interested to learn, how does engagement impact customer satisfaction, or how does it impact safety regulations, and if people are not feeling safe, that can affect their engagement levels. So there's all kinds of business metrics you can start to tie to the data in year two and then in year three.
And the one I'll add here is most people we found from our research are doing an employee engagement survey to impact retention in the organization.
Yeah.
So that's one big metric you'll want to tie this to. And you can do that in year one as well. But usually year one, usually the executive team's like, hey, we ought to find out what people think. Year two, they're like, okay, well, how does this impact business? Mm-hmm. And so this is typically how this plays out.
Yeah. When we get to year three, this is where you can use the results to impact your training initiatives and how you want to spend your dollars on your employees. Leadership development opportunities, if we need to focus in on new managers, sometimes it's come out that new managers aren't getting as good training as the managers already in place. So that's an area of focus that they want to make a new manager training program. So that came out in one. Also, establishing accountability. If you're going to start reporting results down to the manager level, then you want to ask them to do something with it. And so that accountability needs to be in place. But helping them understand that it's also the manager's role to help employees become engaged. It's not just the executives who have to create an engaged workforce. It takes everyone. Employees have to want to be engaged, and then managers can support that.
Yeah, and by year 3, when you're looking at the data, now you're saying, okay, we've given managers 2 years to really get used to this.
Yeah.
And by the 3rd year, if you're still seeing low scores in different departments or by different managers, then you're really saying, okay, it's time to be accountable and do something and make some improvements. And either you invest in leadership development to help them do better at promoting engagement, or you help them in some other way. So.
Yeah, I actually have a client who requires action plans from managers who score below a threshold. So sometimes it can be overwhelming if you have 1,000 managers. You can't manage 1,000 action plans.
Yeah.
And some managers who score high, they may not need to create a full-blown action plan. There's always things people can work on, but kind of honing in on those managers who need the most support and help, and having them do the action plans is a really good idea.
So, and one thing we'll talk about before in terms of best practices, in terms of administering the survey, is how to really get those breakouts. Because using demographic information, rolling up results by managers is one of the more difficult pieces of the process. And so that's why we kind of say phase into it sometimes, and we'll explain how all that works. So we have our definition here of employee engagement, and basically it's a 2-part definition. The first part is about how you feel. So it's this emotional state where you feel passionate, energetic, and committed to your work. And then in turn, that causes some action. So you fully invest your best self, your heart, spirits, minds, and hands in the work that you do. This is where we talk about discretionary effort, going the extra mile, really wanting to do your best in your job. And so engagement is both a feeling and an outcome. And when we look at this, we like to break this into 2 categories, because sometimes the concepts of satisfaction and engagement get mixed together.
Yeah. And sometimes there's a little bit of a confusion. Engagement is relatively new in the last 10 to 15 years, but people always talk about employee satisfaction. And so we maintain that satisfaction are kind of those hygiene factors or transactional factors, so pay and benefits, safety, those things that you really need in place as a baseline before you can decide to be engaged or not engaged. And so those are the satisfaction elements. And then we get into more engagement where you can really give your heart, spirits, minds, and hands to the work that you do. We've done a lot of research on this, and we came up with kind of 5 elements of engagement that spell out magic here.
Yes, we've got meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection. These are the real drivers of employee engagement. And so whereas satisfaction items are about, those transactional things, perks and benefits and compensation, they don't really drive performance. Engagement drives performance, and these are the things that cause people to do their best work. Satisfaction, or go ahead, Snow.
Yeah, I was just going to mention I've done several driver analyses lately with clients, and they're always asking me, what can we do to improve engagement? And when we do those driver analyses, these elements do come to the top. There'll be 3, maybe 4 of them that really are impacting when people move from higher to lower engagement or lower to higher engagement. Really, it's about the meaning that they find in their job, if they have growth opportunities, or if they feel a connection to the organization and their coworkers. So these really do come out a lot that can really influence engagement.
Yeah, and they're all different for everyone. So it's not like you need all 5 at 100% for somebody. You have 3 of them working well, and people are going to be engaged. The thing I was going to say about satisfaction is it is important because it drives both attracting new talent, because people look at your organization and say, wow, they pay well, they got great benefits, great perks, great building, and they also drive retention. So you can keep people for a long time if you pay them a lot of money, but they might not be engaged in their work.
That's true. And sometimes actually in our research we found things that attract people don't necessarily commit them.
Yeah.
And so it can change over time. If they were really excited by the perks and benefits, the things that retain them may be more like growth opportunities.
Yeah, definitely. And then, so engagement drives performance and also retention as well, because people see the benefit of the fun they have at work. All this information is this kind of a brief overview of what we explain in our book, Magic, the 5 Keys to Unlock the Power of Employee Engagement. It's based on all the research that we've done over 20 years as we've gathered employee engagement survey responses and also looked at the psychological literature and review. We've really explained how a manager can kind of take these 5 keys and really engage their team and find their own engagement in their work. Now, the way we measure, or the way to measure engagement, I should say, the best practice here is really about using a set of questions or a subset of questions to get the overall score. Because sometimes we find people are trying to measure engagement using one question or maybe telling us the result.
Or they just ask employees, are you engaged?
Yeah.
So that's challenging.
Well, I'm engaged, but the rest of us
Yeah. Yeah, we use these anchor questions. You'll notice that they're not really actionable. You know, a lot of times people say, well, I only want to ask questions so I'll know what to do about it once I get the results back. And these we actually pepper throughout our survey to give us an idea of how engaged people are. So it's measuring, you know, are you engaged, not what can we do to help you be engaged. We do a different kind of analysis on that. But we find that when people are engaged, it's easy for them to become absorbed in their job. They find enjoyment in their job. They recommend the organization to their family and friends as a great place to work. You know, they're going to stay even if they find another job because of the culture and the people and the connection there. And so these anchor questions we calculate into what's called an engagement spectrum. And we say engagement is a little more fluid than just black and white. It's not you're engaged or you're not engaged. We have these different levels of engagement. So you have fully engaged employees. You have what we call key contributors, which are really strong and steady people. Then we have the opportunity group, which is aptly named, where you should take action. And then we have the fully disengaged group.
And as you look at the spectrum, we kind of describe some of the attitudes or feelings some of these people have about their work. And so from those that are fully disengaged, which we hope are less than 5% of your organization, up to those that are fully engaged, these are the people that are really interested in doing their best, taking some calculated risks, and stretching beyond their comfort zone in a way. And then you can see the rest of them. But key contributors, we also call them engaged. And so when we give an engagement score to an organization, it includes both the fully engaged and key contributors. And we find a good average there is to have between 65 to 75% of your population in that group, with variation between who's fully engaged and disengaged.
Yeah, we really like when we do an executive debrief, we try to focus them in on this opportunity group. Because usually the fully disengaged do not stay. When we do year-over-year analyses, they usually manage themselves out of the organization. A lot of times they're in the wrong job fit. But that opportunity group, they're kind of on the fence, and maybe they don't have the best supervisor, or they haven't been given roles that can challenge and stretch them. And so we like to focus in on them.
We're going to change gears and talk about best practices in designing and how to kind of build an employee engagement survey. So I'm showing a standard employee engagement survey here that includes 50 questions. We're using a 5-point scale, and you can see the questions are grouped into different frames of reference. So there's questions about my job, my team, my supervisor, and so on.
Yeah, this is really kind of a best practice that we use. I've seen other organizations, it's an industry standard to use a 5-point agreement scale. We like to use the don't know option so that neutral category is for people who are on the fence. And so we do a 5-point scale with the don't know option, and then these frames of reference, really it kind of psychologically helps them to answer the questions in an order, starting from the localization of themselves and then moving outward towards farther touches in the organization. So they start with my job, things that asking questions about me personally, how I work, and then we go to my team, which is my coworkers and how we work together, and then my supervisor, if they're giving me the information and recognition that I need to be successful, and then the organization overall. And this is where you can have some questions in there about senior leaders. I have some organizations, if they are large enough, they may want to add another layer in here, like by division or business unit, to try and get some information for that leadership as well. But you do want to keep the survey to about 50 questions or shorter. If you get too much longer than that, then you're going to have rater fatigue. And so it's really nice to have them answer the agreement scale questions and then put the open-ended comments at the end. We just recommend them being prompted by those other questions so that they're ready to say what they like and what they don't like about the organization in those open-ended comments.
So one other thing in terms of using a 5-point scale that's helpful, because I know some people want to say, well, I want to use a 4-point scale and force people to either, not to use that neutral point, to kind of agree or disagree. It's just not a good idea to force them into a positive or negative category. People like that neutral, and they want to be able to use it. Just in my training in survey design, it's just not a good idea. Yeah. And you also get good benchmarking comparisons when you're using a 5-point scale because everyone else is doing the same.
Yes.
So talk about, there's a lot of discussion nowadays about how do you use a pulse survey, and should you abandon a yearly employee engagement survey to use a pulse
survey?
Right.
That's a good question. I think, I've been getting that a lot lately, and my recommendation is that you should still do a yearly annual survey or 18-month survey that has these engagement questions in it and has the ability to ask those frames of reference at the open ends. And then when you're taking action based on that, you help your leaders or your executives action plan. And then you could do a pulse maybe 6 or 9 months later on what has changed or what's being changed and improving. And so doing a pulse in between your yearly surveys is what I typically recommend as the best practice. Now, people say, well, let's just do 3 questions every once in a while. To be honest, I feel like you're going to get over-surveyed, and then people are just going to stop taking the surveys altogether. So you might run into that, where if you're sending a survey out every month to people with 3 questions, they might just stop answering it. I find that when you kind of brand the survey as a yearly event, and even companies I work with, they have their own logo for the survey, and it's part of their Employee Appreciation Week. It really, employees know that's their time to speak up. And so when it becomes very commonplace every month or quarter, I find participation just really trails off.
Yeah, you get kind of the highs and lows, right? People that are really happy or really upset, you don't get like the full spectrum. It also takes a lot more time. So when you do pulse surveying, the good thing about it is that it puts a lot of responsibility and accountability on managers, right? Because all that feedback is usually based on the team, and the questions are more around what the immediate supervisor can do. The problem you find, though, is that if only a quarter of your supervisors and managers are really active with it, then it does burn out in the rest of the organization. So it takes a little bit more effort and time to get all of your managers on board doing it. The other drawback is the benefit is if you're an organization where everyone is connected to the internet, has email, and can get online and do it, great, it works. You have an easy way to roll out the survey data. When you're in a manufacturing environment or maybe a restaurant chain or other place where people aren't connected, it's really difficult and can be expensive to run the surveys every quarter.
Yeah, and if you don't have an organization that's comfortable with feedback, it can do more damage than good. If you're surveying and only a quarter of your managers are actually using it and the rest are not, if people are responding and nothing's being done with it, then you're kind of breeding this culture of we don't care, and so we're just doing a survey to do it. So you want to make sure it's strongly recommended that if you're going to ask questions, then you should be prepared to do something about it. And that's also when you're designing your survey. You don't want to ask questions about compensation if you have no plan to redo the compensation structure. So things like that, you want to make sure that you're keeping in mind whatever you put on the survey is a communication to employees that they should expect from the organization. They can expect that they should have the tools and resources to do their job. They can expect that their supervisors should be recognizing them for the work they do. So that way, if you put it on the survey and it's low, then you should be prepared to do something about that.
And best practice in terms of using pulse surveys is to do your annual engagement survey to get all the kind kind of the macro view of what's going on in the organization. And then the pulse surveys are helpful to work on specific initiatives to do on a quarterly basis or every 6 months to kind of augment your process and keep the momentum moving forward.
Yep.
Okay, so let me change gears here. One thing we don't have here, Tennille, actually one last piece on the survey. We don't list demographic questions here on the survey.
Correct, and that's something I do get questions about. When people have to answer demographics, I find that there's 20% of them or so don't answer them at all or answer them incorrectly, and so your data is not as accurate. If you're going to spend money and time surveying, you want to make sure your data is accurate. And so when you use an online system or even paper surveys with a barcode, you can apply the demographics beforehand so that all of your data is correct. So our recommendation is to not put them on the survey. That way it's it's a confidential process, and it's much smoother and accurate when you get the results back.
Yeah, because the worry, especially the power in demographics, is the roll-up for each manager.
Sure.
So each manager, you want to give them results for his or her team, and if they're answering, oh yeah, my manager's Jim or Susan or whoever, they're answering that incorrectly, then you get a manager who gets a report with the wrong numbers on it.
Yes, I've had that happen before where they get a report with 12 surveys and they say I only have 8 direct reports. So somebody marked the wrong manager, and it can get real messy.
Yeah, so then they discount it, and then manager action planning kind of falls apart.
Yeah.
So that's where it's really critical, whatever system you're using, to be able to capture that information on the back end and tie it to the individual confidentially, but that way you have accurate results and can do more accurate action planning. So in terms of looking at your results, we'll talk about kind of reporting, who sees what, and administration and whatnot. The idea is to provide, of course, overall results and department or let's say team reports to individual managers. But then, of course, HR and the executive team has more access to all of the data and can kind of do some slicing and dicing and drill down to specific results with some limits on confidentiality. So what's the biggest group that you recommend that you show results for?
Right. I find that I don't show results with groups of 5 or less, so less than 5. So 5 is the limit. That's an industry standard. There are some clients that I do 10 as the limit, really, but also you want to look at participation rates. So if your rates are below 50%, then if you have 30 people and only 5 responded, that may not be representative. So looking at participation, but also groups of 5 or more. So you'll have a percentage of supervisors with 2 or 3 people. Just to protect confidentiality, you don't want to report results down that small. And then any demographic filters that you have, our survey system actually has protocols in place to show insufficient if they try to, filter down the females in this department, and if there's not 5, it's not going to show that.
Yeah. Okay. So I did do a change here. I'm showing just the accounting department now that only has 15 people in it, and the results change here. And if you tried to drill down by location or tenure, all of a sudden some of those fields would go blank. So let me switch the structure here and go back to the company overall.
So you can see here Charles is filtering through an organization structure, and over the years I've been doing this for quite a while, and this is always the most challenging part, is figuring out what the organization's org structure looks like. It's funny to me that some organizations don't know what their structure looks like, and so we help them build it for them. But really, you want to think about what kind of metrics you do report out. If you have customer service metrics by business unit or location, then that's the kind of org structure that you'll also want to be reporting out engagement, because those leaders are used to getting those reports, and so they're going to want to see how engagement is doing in those areas. So that's something to think about. How do my departments roll up into the divisions or the business units within my organization, and then do supervisors roll up cleanly in that, or do they work as a matrix or cross-functionally.
Yeah, and that takes the most time basically on the front end trying to figure
it is a lot of work. So if you get overwhelmed, don't worry, you're
you're in the boat with the
company with everyone else. But doing that work up front really allows you to get really good, accurate results. And so then you can use a system like this to filter into your different departments, and you can see comparisons across the board.
Yeah, so some of the data points that are helpful in a dashboard or summary view is to look at the breakouts by different categories. So we were using these frames of reference. Sometimes other recommendations here are to use different maybe topics or themes, so maybe around communication or leadership or things like that. You can kind of categorize your questions however you want, and that way you get summary results there. The overall score is the average of all the questions, and then the engagement result is different. So you see, we recommend breaking it out by those that are fully engaged to fully disengaged, and so this kind of is your engagement index. Participation is here as well. What's a good number for participation, Tennille?
Yeah, we recommend that you should have above 75%. If you've communicated it properly up front, you have a really good message from the CEO kind of championing the process, then you'll get, upwards of 80% participation, especially if there's reminders going out. I usually send 2 reminders to people who don't take it so that we can get above 80%. Even with paper surveys, many of the organizations I work with, I have above 80% participation. So, sometimes you see, customer satisfaction surveys and you've got like 25% participation. That's not a good rate for employees. Employees should be answering, and if you've communicated it properly, then you should be getting upwards of 80%.
You can see highest and lowest scores here, and so this is where you start you want to kind of understand the story of what's going on. And so people are feeling challenged and stretched. We label this a growth question, one of the magic keys. Becoming absorbed in my job is actually one of the anchor questions we use, which indicates, which is averaged into their overall engagement. Meaning and purpose is one of the magic keys, again, around meaning. People helping each other. Teamwork's always a high-scoring question for the most part, and then taking accountability for results, another teamwork question. But the issues in this organization are around stress, workload, communication, again, communication across departments, and having the tools and resources. And so it gives you kind of a first clue into what's going on and what you can improve.
And that's also why you don't want to ask just 5 or 10 questions. You want to get really specific into what are the areas that need work. And so you can see with this organization, people feel, pretty much engaged, and they feel challenged and stretched, but they're almost being stretched too much. They have too much workload. And so having those really specific questions about stress and communicating and having a reasonable workload, those are areas where you can create an action plan. If you just said, well, are you feeling engaged or not engaged, it doesn't really tell you anything. And so you really want some of these more actionable items on your survey.
Yeah, so that's why the annual survey is important, because you get a comprehensive look at what's going on, and your pulse surveying helps fill in the gaps. So we recommend showing the information by favorable scores. Favorable are the strongly agree and agree areas, so that's what's blue on in this bar. The neutral area is gray, and then the disagree and strongly disagree are over here on red. Right. So you can kind of see again, stress, communication, workload are low in this case, and I'm just going to click on workload to kind of dig into that one a little bit closer. But where you can see now is a breakout by gender, for example, which is pretty even. People are kind of feeling the same way over workload. But if you apply a different view and look at location, you can see St. Louis is feeling the pinch a little bit more than the rest of the location. So here you can start saying, okay, are there staffing issues in some of these places, or do they have, and you'll know, usually organizations know why St. Louis is so overworked, right? It's not a surprise. But now they can quantify how people are feeling about it. Exactly. The other thing you can start doing is, the good thing when you have your demographic information is to be able to apply the filters to it. So if you want to say, okay, in this location, how do my managers feel about the workload compared to non-managers, for example, you can then have a breakout and just show your managers. So managers are feeling it, but New York, it's even worse now. So now you see another little bit of information there. So maybe there's not enough leadership in New York to handle the workload. Anyway, these are some of the things that will help you really understand what's going on within your organization and pinpoint some of the areas to focus your results. The other thing in terms of understanding or using, let me take off the manager status, is understanding the, like you said before, understanding where the pockets of high and low scores are. So if we were to look across the entire organization by team, we can see those that are scoring the highest or have the most favorable scores overall, and those departments that have the lowest favorable scores. So again, where to kind of focus your efforts.
Yeah, and I find HR always asks for this list. They do want to see it compared because that's really where they're going to make the most impact and help the rest of the organization come up to the right level. I had a company that I worked with. They always talked about, you know, their engaged locations were the baseline, and they wanted to elevate everyone up to that level. And so what kind of focus or action do we need to take to help them come up to that level?
Yeah, and the thing you want to look at is, you know, what is engaging our engaged people and what's disengaging our disengaged people, right? So it's really understanding it's all localized in a lot of instances where leadership has a strong influence over engagement, so does staffing and kind of what's going on in the culture in that location. And so you want to use the results to really understand that better.
Yeah, and sometimes we say, why don't you take some supervisors and highly engaged and make them an example and ask them, what are you doing well, or have them talk to some of the supervisors who are not doing as well, and that helps give some ideas.
Using the engagement scores, then you can start looking at some of the common or the similarities between some of these groups. So as we look at this distribution, there's 13% in this opportunity group, and what's nice is you want to be able to see, okay, what's unique about them? What are they feeling that's different about the rest of the organization? So as we look at those questions, the responses for the different questions for that group, the highest scoring items are feeling challenged and stretched. They like their supervisor. The vision and goals of the company are important to them. But these aren't very many high scores, right? 24%.
Yeah, and this is strongly agree. So we're looking at just the opportunity group people. What do they strongly agree? That's the positive perceptions. But really the nuggets of information here, you want to look at the negative perceptions. So where is our opportunity to influence the opportunity group to sway over to the engagement camp? So we look at the opportunity group employees, over half of them, 57%, disagree or strongly disagree that they have the freedom to choose how to best perform their job. So maybe they're being micromanaged, or they don't have as much freedom as they like. Notice that wasn't the lowest score. That wasn't stress and workload, which are in here, but it's freedom. And so we want to focus in on do people have some of that freedom, or are there too many regulations? I worked with a company where there was just so much paperwork, and they were being really bogged down by all of this paperwork that was influencing their engagement and their ability to want to be there because they couldn't do their actual job. They kept putting it in air quotes, my job. I talked to them in a focus group, and they said, this paperwork is just, it's inhibiting me in that area. So also there's some who have, you know, supervisors who are maybe not as motivating as others. And so we'll want to look into that, or these people aren't getting all the communications from the organization. They're just hearing things from their supervisor, hearing rumors. So this is really where you'd want to focus in and help people become more engaged. That opportunity group, if you start to address these issues, they're going to be addressed across the organization because you're not going to have a list of who these people are. And it will help improve engagement across the board.
Yeah, and so I like what you said before. It wasn't, you noticed that workload and stress weren't the lowest scoring questions here like we saw in the rest of the organization. If you look across departments, you can kind of see where these opportunity group people are. They're relatively evenly dispersed. You can check by tenure as well. So there's a variety of different ways you want to look at your opportunity group to see maybe how to pinpoint them. You don't obviously want to pull off a list of names of everyone in that group and start working one-on-one.
Well, you can. I mean, I've been in so many executive meetings where they ask me for the list of fully disengaged. And they even try to bribe me for it.
Don't do that because you'll never be able to run an employee survey again.
Yeah, no.
One other thing that's good to do with your data, of course, is to tie it to attrition. And so one question that's important to ask on a survey is, if given a choice, I'd remain with this organization even if a job with similar pay and benefits were available elsewhere. By taking this question and pivoting off of that result or the scores for that question, looking at some of the different perceptions for these groups, again, I'm going to go to the undecided, which is similar to the opportunity group. And you can start seeing some of the same themes and questions rising to the top. So here, stress is really driving attrition in a way. But supervisor creating a motivating atmosphere, communication, working across departments, those are also important.
You know, I've done this by performance category before, and it's really interesting. An organization, they gave me their performance data, it matched it up with the engagement data.
Performance review score.
Yeah. They have like 5 different categories of performance, and they were really surprised at the results to this, that their high performers still had some undecided or high potential for turnover. And the question that rose to the top was stress and workload. And so you have high performers, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to stay if that stress and workload continues to be an issue for them.
So again, retention is or attrition is one of the big reasons why people conduct an engagement survey, and it's important to look at the data side by side. You can get some really good insights. Comments are really important, and so we talked about before on the survey having 2 questions. We like to use what needs improvement and what are the greatest strengths, but we definitely recommend reading through all the comments because you will get a very good idea of what's going on in your organization.
Yeah, sometimes I get the question that, you know, let's put a comment after every time they mark disagree, have them write why. So,
right.
I don't recommend that because people will just start marking agree, and so then your data is not going to be accurate because they're going to be tired of that box popping up. But really, like I said earlier, priming them with the questions and asking them real specifically how they feel about their job, their team, their supervisor. They're ready to answer anything else that wasn't addressed. And you know, I'm always surprised that we get more positive comments than negative most of the time. I say 80% of the time. There are more positive comments than negative comments because people want to say thank you. They do have a lot of good things going on, and I think it's a reiteration for HR that everything's not terrible. You know, HR may only hear about the complaints, and they're always, you know, trying to address issues. But the survey can also help you and your executives feel more positive about how things are going in the organization. And so having both of those comments, I've had people say, well, we just want the negative ones because we got to know what we need to change. But really, I recommend having that positive one so you can see what you're doing well as an organization, because we want you to also leverage your strengths. It's not just about addressing issues, but how can we address issues while leveraging the strengths? And so that's something important to keep in mind.
One thing that's helpful in a tool is to be able to use do a keyword search, and so you can type in certain words and then focus in on just those comments that include those, and it kind of keys you into some of the findings that you saw in the results, and then see what people are actually saying, get the color commentary. The other thing that's helpful, and this is one thing that executives ask for all the time, which is benchmarking information. How do we compare to our competitors in the industry? And so you want to be able to show some type of data. We find this conversation is usually short during the executive presentation of the results. It's usually about a 5 or 10 minute conversation. Mm-hmm. You look at a few things and they say, okay, that looks good, great, thanks, move on. And they're more interested in what's really going on in the company.
Yeah, but they always, you know, like I said, finance always wants to know the numbers. They want to know how they're doing, and I think it's a valid question, you know, how are we doing compared to our competitors? But oftentimes, people's direct competitors aren't doing engagement surveys. So you're already ahead of the game.
Yeah.
If you're doing that. And obviously, you do want to see relative, you know, if you score really low. A lot of companies score really low on interdepartmental communication and collaboration. And so, you know, when they get 40%, I say, well, the benchmark is 65. So you're still low, but it's not like it's 80. So that's a good perception to keep in mind. But really, ultimately, you want to focus in on what your organization is struggling with.
Yeah, and you'll get benchmarks by working with an outside organization most times. If you're doing using a survey or software tool internally, A lot of times it's harder to get some good benchmark data. And the expectation a lot of times executives have is that we can get benchmark data for all 10 of our competitors. Well, not really, because maybe only half of them are actually doing an engagement survey, and of those half, they're all using someone else to do it or doing it internally.
Or using different questions.
Yeah, so it's hard to get the apples to apples comparison, but you do get like a benchmark in manufacturing, for example. So then the other thing I want to touch on is best practices in terms of action planning. And so one of the struggles HR professionals have is getting the managers to actually look at the results and create an action plan for their team. There's a variety of different ways to do this. We've worked with organizations to do it on paper, to do it by sharing Word documents or even Excel spreadsheets, and using online tools. And so we have an online tool called Depot that we offer to clients to allow them to create their goals. And what you want to try to do, though, is create accountability in the process.
Yeah, I think the strongest recommendation I always make is HR should not create the action plans for the managers.
Yeah.
I think HR can be a support for them, help train them, but ultimately change is not going to happen unless managers take accountability for helping to make the change. And so our tool really is geared towards managers creating the action plans and following up on it themselves. Obviously, HR can look at it and track it, but HR shouldn't be going around being the action plan police. Sometimes I have clients who are like, they're just spending all their time just policing and saying, okay, they have to be in this time and keeping all these forms. And so, using a system like Depot is helpful because it's all in one place. You can view kind of the activity, but your managers have a space to put in their action plans. They can collaborate with their team on it, and even keep their own notes. Charles is showing you here the notes on the right-hand side. If they need to add a reminder for themselves, that's nice. So it's more of an individual action plan that HR kind of have as a view into.
Yeah, and so the idea is it's a flexible yet simple place for them to kind of create goals. And the other benefit is that you're also able to show the engagement results right in the system, and so now you can see basically the same report that we were looking at before. Managers like to also be able to see the goals of their direct reports, and so you can kind of see the progress of those that you're working with, and it's more of a collaboration tool. And as HR, you're able to see goals for the organization overall and kind of follow up with people. Even the CEO could see all of this information. So in terms of action planning, again, you want to focus on those managers that really need to do it. And one way to provide or to hold people accountable is to share these action plans during your corporate meetings, to kind of highlight people that are doing a great job and making progress. But that way you're kind of keeping the motivation or the momentum going.
Yeah, there's a couple of recommendations I always give. Number one is you shouldn't have 5 or 6 goals. You should have 1 or 2. Really, picking 1 or 2 things that you need to focus in on. If you have a lot to do, you shouldn't try and do it all in year 1 or year 2 or in just within 12 months. You should just pick 1 or 2 initiatives that you want to focus in on. Each manager should, again, only have 1 or 2 goals. And then if you can enlist the employees to help keep the supervisors accountable, that's always a good idea. So I always encourage HR to have a session with the managers to talk about their results, and then tell the managers, look, you need to sit down with your team, go over your results, and then ask maybe for volunteers if they have a large team that want to be part of an engagement committee, and that way they're holding the manager accountable. Also, when the manager shares results with their team is naturally going to ask about what's being done to address those issues. And so sharing the information, being more transparent, will elicit that accountability that you're looking for.
So I changed over to a slide to give you a demonstration of kind of a best practice in organization action planning. So at the executive level, usually there's initiatives that are proposed and then fed down to the organization for people to focus or create goals around as an individual manager. In this case, and this is the client you were working with, Neil, the organization goals, large healthcare organization, was around caring, because on one of their questions on the survey, this organization cares about employees, they weren't scoring too high.
Yeah, it was really, really low. And when I met with the senior leaders, they said, well, what are we supposed to do about this? What does the caring mean? What's going on here? And so one of the things that they did is they ran some focus groups. They did a follow-up pulse survey. They asked for more additional information. So they weren't just, trying to action plan in a vacuum, but they were trying to get more perspective on what to do. And then they came up with these initiatives that they implemented. So they found out that employees wanted the senior leaders to be more visible. So they weren't seeing them. They were saying, well, I have, this division leader, but I've never seen their face. I've never seen them come around. Or my supervisor is not even in his office ever. He's always in meetings. So, having 1 hour of open office time each day made sure that employees had access to their supervisor. They also did daily rounds for all the supervisors to see their employees. Another company I worked with, they actually cut out some of the meetings. Employees told us they had all these meetings. Supervisors were just in meetings all day. And so they actually have given them that hour during the day, and they're expected to go out on the field with their employees and be there, be accessible. We also added the question on the following survey the next year, the leaders of my department are visible on a regular basis, so that we could measure this action item that we had come up with.
Well, it also creates some accountability too, because you're telling managers, hey, we're going to see if this is any better next year.
Exactly.
So the outcome here was that the score on that particular question went up by 4%.
Yeah, when you have a large organization, it's really hard to increase a score even 1%. When you have tens of thousands of employees, increasing 4% is huge, and that was a really big win for them this year.
And that tied into retention, which was their big concern as well in a highly competitive healthcare environment. And so we've listed 6 best practices when it comes to organization goals. One is to get your leadership behind you, so sponsorship. Make sure that they are on board in terms of not only running the survey, but in really pushing out these initiatives, and that they set the direction. So those are kind of go hand in hand, but when there's strong leadership and strong direction, and it's reiterated throughout your company meetings and communications, it really helps set the tone. The next one was, the third item is create alignment, and this ties into the question that we like to use on the survey is I see how my work fits into the overall mission of the organization. And so if you have a goal around whatever, increasing performance or something like that, make sure people understand that there's a bigger reason for the goal as opposed to just what it looks like on the surface. Transparency is key, and so the question here is I trust that senior leadership is looking out for me. When we're saying transparency around organization goals, is communicating what the issue is, what you're trying to improve, and then how you're going about to improve it, what the end game is. And so people are clear on this isn't just another flavor of the month initiative from corporate. It's something they're serious about, and there's a big reason behind it. And that's why communication is important. You can't over-communicate these particular goals, but it also means both up and down communication, so employee voice. So are your employees being heard when they have suggestions? And that's another question we like to use is suggestions for improvements are listened to and taken seriously.
We always recommend that you get credit for the initiatives that you do. So, if you have it as a yearly initiative, you can tie what you're doing to say, we heard you on the survey and we're doing this. And so we want to make sure that you're increasing this employee voice perception by getting credit for the initiatives that you're taking action.
And the last piece is getting progress reports, and this just means from your managers mostly, understanding if they're really doing something about it and where they are in terms of their goals. And so, an online action planning tool like Depot really helps, or if you're doing this through various, meetings that you have, there's a section or a time reserved in your meeting to talk about that initiative and how you're doing. So a couple last best practices that we'll share with you is from a study that we did, our State of Engagement report, and we asked companies how they were doing on employee engagement, if they were trending upward, staying the same, or going downward. And we found that 32% of the companies that participated out of about 200 responses replied that their engagement was going upward. So we were very curious about what they were doing that was working, so well. And we found that there were basically 5 things. Number one, they were consistently measuring employee engagement. So this is annually measuring engagement, keeping momentum, looking at their scores, trending, all that kind of stuff. They just did it every year as a best practice. Number 2, they involved all their managers in action planning. This is kind of hard for some organizations, but it's really key to increasing the scores because they have so much influence over employee engagement, and also helps to increase accountability for it at the manager level. Number 3, they provided training, and there are a few different types of training. It wasn't just general leadership training, although that's important, but it was training on employee engagement. So, you're measuring engagement, but a lot of times your managers don't know what it is, or your employees don't, and so by communicating this and doing more training with your leaders, they understand how to, use the magic keys, for example, to increase engagement on their team. Number 4 is interesting because we found a lot of organizations were not measuring the return on investment when they conducted employee surveys. It was almost separate from, a separate initiative that wasn't tied to organization goals. And so definitely tie this in at least to retention efforts. And the better organizations we saw are looking at profitability, performance, and a variety of different metrics. And number 5, we found organizations that were increasing their levels of engagement were working with an outside provider, either because they were getting an added level of expertise, but a lot of times we find that an external provider has some skin in the game to make sure that you're successful, and so they're accountable as well to help you with improvements, and they kind of tend to kick people in the pants a little bit more to make sure that they're doing things as opposed to just using the results, using it as an awareness activity, and then going back to business as usual.
It also provides a level of confidentiality that really makes you successful in employee engagement surveys.
So that concludes the presentation for today. If you have questions, please let us know. We can spend some more time now to talk about those with us. If you're interested in understanding DecisionWise surveys or surveys and services and solutions, let us know. We do a variety. We're kind of a full-service employee engagement survey company, and so we can help you in any aspect, either from designing a survey or action planning on the results. And if you'd like to get an estimate for your next survey, have questions about implementation or converting past data, anything like that, just let us know. On this slide, you'll also see the HRCI and SHRM activity codes for today's presentation. I'll be sending those out in an email, so feel free to use those to redeem that free credit. And otherwise, we're thankful that you all joined us today, and we hope that you join us on a future webinar. Thanks, everybody.